We're going to start creating our application by creating a new Java class that extends the async runner. We've already created that file for you with some missing code. You're going to find that file inside of the additional files folder. Drag that into the dev training folder, and let's take a look at that file. As you can see here, it says order producer extends the async runner. And there's multiple to-do items that we're going to have to complete in this file before we can execute it. The first is we're going to have to bring in the dynamic producer factory and the message generator. We've already talked about the message generator. The dynamic producer factory is going to be a way for us so that every time we create a message, we can go check in a cache to see if that producer already exists, instead of having to create the producer many, many times. And potentially then if we need 3 producers, 4 producers in different parts of your application, you can always check the producer factory to see if it exists, and if it does, get it returned to you for use. So we're going to have to create the producer factory, and I'll go over that file in just a minute. Inside of the work loop, remember that's a method that we have to create since it's abstract in the async runner. We're going to create each message that we're going to send, and then we're going to go to the producer factory, see if our producer's there. If it's not, have the factory create it for us. If it is, return it. Then send the message, and we're going to be sending this asynchronously, the asynchronous method will return a completable future, and then we're going to return that from the work loop back to do work, which we'll call get and wait for that send to actually complete. So we're actually going to use send async, but each time, the way we've set up our work loop, it's going to wait for it to finish. Remember, the setup method is also abstract, so we need to create it, and this is run once prior to the work loop starting. So we need to initialize our producer factory and register it, as well as initialize our message generator for creating messages. This also is supposed to return a completable future, but we're just going to return a dummy one. And our main method is actually going to create a new order producer object, which is the class that we're working in, register it for shutdown, and then run the run method from the async runner, which, remember, the run method is what causes setup to first run and then the work loop, and then get is called, but if the work loop never finishes, this main method will never exit. So let's take a quick look at the producer factory here. And the producer factory, when you pass in the client to it, the dynamic producer factory, this is going to be our constructor. It creates a hash map, and the client here is held locally. When we call get producer, it's going to call the hash map, the producer cache, to see if that already exists. If it doesn't, it's going to create a new producer with the schema of type string. If it does exist, it's just going to return the existing producer. So to help you each time see if a new producer got created, I've placed a print line statement in here that says create a new producer with topic, and it will list the topic name. So we base our whether or not the producer exists or not based on the topic name. And you'll see each time one gets created based on this print line. Going back to orderProducer.java, let's finish our to-do statements. The first is create the dynamic producer factory and message generator objects. This won't initialize them, but they will exist when we call the new order producer. It will create this object since this is going to exist inside of the order producer class. So first I'm going to call or make a dynamic producer factory object. We'll call that producer factory. Next, I'm going to make sure that initializes in my setup. So if I go down into my setup, the to-do is create our producer factory and register the resource. So producer factory equals new, and that's going to call the constructor, and I call it on dynamic producer factory, the class, and I have to pass in the client into that constructor. So now that's initialized for use, and then producer factory can be used anywhere inside of our work loop. Next, we're going to create the message generator. So I'm also going to create a message generator. And inside of setup, I will say message generator equals new message generator, calling the constructor. And now that's also available for use. That finishes up our entire setup and also adding these two objects into the order producer class. Now we need to complete the work loop. The first thing we're going to do is use the message generator to get our next message each time the work loop is executed. So that's on the message generator object. As you remember, there was a method called nextStringMessage inside of the message generator, and that will return a string message object. We need to store that in the correct object type, and that is message generator.string message, and that is we'll say that's the message. Since we're going to be producing to a topic, I should also at this point place my topic name inside of a string. I'll say string topic equals, and we use persistent. And again, use your student ID, the developer namespace, and let's write this to a topic called order backlog China. And I will write every time that we hit this point, I'm going to write system.out.println. We'll say will publish message. I'll use my message object that I got from message generator string message, the next string message. We'll say get value. Let me show you where that comes from. So of that string message, there's a get, so that's an object. There's a get value method, which returns the value, which is stored as a string. So that's actually the string that we're going to write to the server. So I write that out in my print line, and I'm going to say asynchronously to topic, and then I'll write my topic name out. So every time the work loop gets to this point, it's going to tell me what my current message's value is, and it's going to tell me what topic it's about to write to. So the first thing we need to do is, for the producer factory, is to get our producer. So I'm able to use the producer factory and say get producer, and I'm supposed to pass in the topic name. As I mentioned before, we pass in the topic name. That will return a completable future with the producer inside of it. So to get that producer back out of it, I say then compose using some of the asynchronous methods inside of Java. The producer is returned, and I pass that into this following method. So now remember, I have the producer. I'm going to call producer.newMessage, just as we had done in the synchronous calls. And I say .value, and I pass in the string that I want to send. This, again, was message.getValue. So it was the message generator.string message object, and the get value was to get the string off of it. And since we're doing this asynchronously, instead of doing .send, I'm going to do .send async. I need to return this completable future from send async back to the then compose. So that's my return statement, is the completable future from send async being returned back to then compose. When then compose is complete, that will send back a completable future, which I return as the return statement of my work loop. That will then go over to the async runner. So if we go back into util, that completable future returns here. Let me just find it. This completable future. And then we call .get and wait for the send async call to finish before running the work, continuing to run the work loop. We will talk more later about getting around this to a truly asynchronous where you can send a whole bunch of messages before waiting for the send async by removing this get, but we will talk about that a little bit later. So back into order producer, we've completed the creation of the dynamic producer factory and message generator. I've created the message, chosen a topic. I've used the producer factory to make sure that if I'm using the same topic multiple times, that I don't have to create a new producer for each message. So I just create it once for that topic and then reuse it for every message. I then use the asynchronous then compose to unwrap that completable future, create the new message with the correct value, send async, and then return that, which returns back to this one, which then goes back to the work loop. Let's go ahead and try this out. So I've still got my terminal open here at the bottom. This one is called order producer, and I've got the Maven command here for us to execute it at the top. So I'm going to just scroll down here and give this one a try and see if I've got any errors. So it compiled fine. It's starting the order producer. It's saying it will publish, but it has to create the producer for order backlog China. But however, every single time it produces, it doesn't have to create that topic or that producer again. And notice our messages. I said here to print out the message.getValue. Our messages are, for instance, 15 US, 16 China, 17 US, 18 China, 19 US, 20 China. And that's because over in our message generator, I'm alternating back and forth here with my string message onto what the message should be. And that's stored in the string here.